The morning Victor Okafor came to court to destroy his wife. He walked in like a man who believed fate worked for him personally. He wasn't nervous. He wasn't doubtful. He wasn't even angry anymore. He was calm, polished, and dangerously confident, the way a man looks when he believes the ending has already been written in his favor. His burgundy tie was perfectly straight. His shoes reflected the courtroom lights. The expensive watch on his wrist gleamed every time he moved his hand over the stack of legal papers in front of him. Victor had spent years building a reputation as the kind of man nobody wanted on the other side of a fight. In business, he was ruthless. In private, he was colder. And in this divorce, he intended to be unforgettable. People in his circle called him many things behind his back, but the one nickname that followed him most was the Hammer. Because when Victor decided to hit, he didn't stop until whatever stood in front of him had cracked completely. His lawyer leaned in and spoke in a smooth, low voice. "It doesn't matter if she shows up with tears or excuses," he said. "The emergency order went through. The joint accounts are frozen. She has no access to cash." Victor smiled without looking up. "No money means no lawyer," he replied. "And no lawyer means she walks out of here with whatever crumbs I decide she deserves." Across the aisle sat Joy. Alone. No assistant, no files, no legal team, no whispered strategy, no glass of water. Just a woman in a plain gray dress, sitting very still at the defense table, with her hands folded so tightly that her knuckles had gone pale. She looked smaller than Victor remembered. Not physically, maybe, but spiritually. Like life had pressed on her for so long that she had learned to take up less space just to survive. Victor looked at her and felt something close to satisfaction. This was what he had wanted. Not just the divorce, not just the house, not just the money. He wanted her to feel powerless. He wanted her to understand that leaving him had consequences. He wanted her to sit there in public and realize that no one was coming. "Look at her," he said, loud enough for the handful of people in the courtroom gallery to hear. "Pathetic. It's like watching a lamb wait outside the slaughterhouse." A few heads turned. His lawyer shifted uncomfortably. "Keep your voice down." Victor leaned back in his chair. "Why? It's the truth." At the front of the courtroom, the bailiff called for everyone to rise. The judge entered with the kind of presence that could flatten a room without ever raising his voice. Justice Benjamin Okoro had spent years on the bench, and it showed in the way people instantly straightened when he stepped in. He sat down, adjusted his glasses, and opened the case file in front of him. "Be seated." The room settled. He looked first to the plaintiff's side. "Counsel, are you ready to proceed?" Victor's lawyer stood. "Yes, your lordship." Then the judge turned to Joy. "Mrs. Okafor, I see you are here without counsel. Are you expecting representation?" Joy stood slowly. Her voice, when it came, was soft but steady enough to be heard. "Yes, your lordship. My attorney is on the way." Victor let out a short, ugly laugh. The judge's eyes snapped toward him. "Is something amusing, Mr. Okafor?" Victor rose halfway. "No, your lordship." His lawyer put a hand on his sleeve and gently forced him fully to his feet. "My apologies, my lord. My client is under considerable emotional strain." The judge's stare lingered a moment longer than was comfortable. "Control your client. This is a court of law, not a street corner." Then he looked back at Joy. "This hearing was scheduled to begin on time. If your attorney is not here shortly, I will have to assume you were proceeding without representation." "She's coming," Joy said. Victor leaned forward just enough to let his voice carry. Or maybe no lawyer wants to work for someone who can't pay. The accounts are frozen, remember? The gavel came down with a crack so sharp it felt like something had split in the air. "One more interruption," the judge said coldly, "and you will spend the rest of this hearing in a holding cell. Do I make myself clear?" Victor nodded quickly. "Yes, your lordship." But his eyes were still full of mockery. He couldn't help himself. This was too perfect. He had planned this for months. He had frozen the money. He had spread the right whispers among mutual friends. He had made sure Joy would be isolated, embarrassed, and exhausted before she ever walked into court. He wanted her humiliated before he wanted her defeated. His lawyer stood again. "Your lordship, with respect, the defense has had ample time to secure representation. We move to proceed." The judge looked at Joy with a kind of weary disappointment, like a man who had seen this same tragedy wear 100 different faces. "Mrs. Okafor, if you cannot produce counsel, the court must move forward." Joy's eyes stayed fixed on the rear doors of the courtroom. "Please," she said quietly. "Just a little more time." Victor smiled to himself. No one was coming. No rich uncle. No mysterious friend. No miracle advocate. He knew Joy's story. Or at least, he thought he did. He knew she had grown up with distance in her life, fractures in her family, old wounds she never liked to explain. He knew enough to believe she had no one powerful enough to matter. And that belief made him careless, which is what destroyed him. The judge reached for his gavel. Then the courtroom doors flew open so hard they slammed into the walls. The sound echoed like a gunshot. Every head turned. Even Victor turned, irritated first, then confused, then suddenly still. A woman stood in the doorway in a flawless white suit. She looked to be in her late 60s, but she carried herself with the kind of straight-backed authority that made younger people feel clumsy in their own bodies. Her silver hair was sharp and immaculate. Her sunglasses were dark, expensive, and unnecessary indoors, which somehow made them even more intimidating. Behind her came 3 younger lawyers carrying leather briefcases, moving in perfect formation. She did not rush. She walked down the center aisle like a woman entering a room she already owned. Her heels struck the floor with calm precision. One step, then another, and something changed in the room. Victor noticed it first in his own lawyer. The man had gone pale. Not worried, not uncomfortable. Afraid. Real fear. Victor frowned. "Who is that?" His lawyer did not answer. The woman stopped at Joy's table, removed her sunglasses slowly, and revealed eyes that looked like they had spent decades seeing through lies before they were even spoken aloud. Then she turned toward the bench. "My apologies for the delay, your lordship," she said. "I was finalizing filings related to several undeclared accounts connected to Mr. Okafor. It took longer than expected to organize the evidence." Victor felt the blood leave his face. The judge leaned forward. "Counsel, state your name for the record." The woman placed a card before the court reporter and spoke clearly. "Helen Adekunle, Senior Managing Partner at Adekunle, Williams & Partners. I am entering my appearance for the defendant, Mrs. Joy Okafor." Then she paused, looked straight at Victor, and added, "I am also her mother." For a moment, the room lost sound. Victor stared. Mother? Joy had told him her mother was gone. Not dead, no, but gone. Gone enough that he had stopped thinking about her. Gone enough that he had convinced himself she no longer existed in any way that mattered. Now she was here, not as some emotional relative begging for mercy, but as a legal hurricane in a white suit. Joy finally looked up. There were tears in her eyes, but her chin was high. "I said she was gone from my life," she said. "I never said she was dead." Helen sat beside her daughter and opened a heavy briefcase. The clicks of the locks sounded surgical. "Joy left my world years ago because she wanted a simple life," Helen said calmly. "She wanted love without power attached to it. She wanted to be chosen for herself, not because of my name or my firm or the doors I could open. We were estranged until yesterday." Then she turned to Victor's lawyer. "Counselor, it's been a long time." He swallowed. "It's an honor, ma'am." "No," Helen said. "It isn't." The judge cleared his throat. "Mrs. Adekunle, we are currently in a hearing involving property division and support." "Yes," Helen replied. "And that is why I'm here. Because what opposing counsel calls a straightforward divorce is, in fact, a coordinated attempt at coercion, concealment, fraud, and financial abuse." She handed a thick stack of documents to the bailiff, who carried them to the judge. A second stack landed on the plaintiff's table with a heavy thud. Victor flinched. Helen continued. "The plaintiff claims the properties in question are solely his. He further claims a prenuptial agreement excludes my daughter from meaningful recovery." "It does," Victor snapped. "She signed it." Helen turned her head slowly. It was a small movement, but it had the effect of a blade being unsheathed. "Mr. Okafor," she said, "do you know who helped draft the legal framework now used to identify coercion in prenuptial agreements?" Victor said nothing. "I did." She let that settle. "And according to my client's sworn statement, supported by phone records and recovered messages, she signed under threat. Specifically, threats made against members of her family if she refused." The courtroom reacted in a rush of gasps and shifting bodies. "That's a lie!" Victor shouted. "She's lying!" "We have the messages," Helen said evenly. "You weren't as careful as you believed." The judge turned pages. His face hardened. Victor's lawyer was sweating now, flipping frantically through exhibits he clearly hadn't expected to see. "If you're already hooked," the narrator might say here, "go ahead and like this video and subscribe, because this story is only getting started, and what happens next is the kind of justice people wait years to see." Helen did not sit down. She reached into her briefcase again and pulled out another file, thicker than the first. "Now let's discuss the finances," she said. Victor's lawyer rose on shaky legs. "Your lordship, we've had no time to review this." "Sit down," the judge said. He sat. Helen addressed the court as if she were delivering a lecture to a room full of students too inexperienced to understand how badly they'd misread the case. "Mr. Okafor has represented his net worth as modest, respectable perhaps, limited. Unfortunately for him, my team spent the last 18 hours tracing a network of shell companies, offshore transfers, undeclared digital assets, and concealed holdings tied directly or indirectly to him." She placed the next folder on the table. "The amount in question is not small." Victor's mouth had gone dry. The judge looked up. "How much?" Helen's eyes never left Victor. 98 million naira in hidden assets, your lordship. Possibly more once the full forensic accounting is complete." The courtroom seemed to tilt around him. Victor looked at his lawyer. His lawyer looked away. Helen pressed on. These funds were moved through corporate structures in order to reduce my daughter's legal share, mislead the court, and maintain control. That's not true, Victor said, but even he could hear how weak it sounded. Helen smiled. It gets worse. Of course it did. That was the moment Victor started to understand that this was not a hearing anymore. It was an excavation. And Helen Adekunle had come prepared to dig until she found every bone he had buried. She rose and approached the witness area. Your Lordship, I would like to call the plaintiff. Victor's lawyer leaned toward him and whispered harshly, You filed this action. You have to testify. Victor stood on legs that no longer felt fully reliable. He made his way to the witness stand and took the oath. He sat down trying to gather what was left of his confidence. He reminded himself who he was, a senior manager, a respected man, an educated man, a man who had handled pressure before. But pressure had never looked like Helen. She stood before him with empty hands, no notes, no visible effort. That made it worse. Mr. Okafor, she said pleasantly. Earlier, you suggested my daughter is disorganized and incapable of managing finances. Is that your position? Victor cleared his throat. Yes. And that is why you took full control of all marital funds? Yes. To protect the marriage? Yes. Helen nodded. I see. Then perhaps you can explain why, while protecting the marriage, you purchased an apartment through Summit Holdings and furnished it with a king-size bed, imported kitchen appliances, and custom decor. Victor froze. It was an investment property. Really? She pulled a single page from a folder. Then why was the same property used to host your mistress? Joy's breath caught. Victor gripped the witness rail. That's irrelevant. Not when marital money paid for it. The judge's gaze sharpened. Answer the question. Victor looked trapped now, though he still didn't fully understand how obvious it was to everyone else. I don't know what she's talking about. Helen tilted her head. Blessing. Does that name help? Victor flinched. There it was. That tiny, involuntary movement. The courtroom saw it. The judge saw it. Joy saw it. And Helen absolutely saw it. She let the silence work for her before moving to the next strike. In your sworn financial statement, you declared your annual income as 8 million naira, correct? Yes. And yet bank records from a financial institution in Dubai show a transfer of 12 million naira into an account connected to Summit Holdings on the same day you claimed business was poor. Victor's face drained again. What did you do with that money, Mr. Okafor? No answer. She stepped closer. Allow me. You converted it into cryptocurrency and stored access credentials in a safety deposit box. Would you like me to provide the branch and box number as well? His jaw dropped open. The courtroom murmured. Helen's voice became softer now, and somehow that made it terrifying. You mocked my daughter this morning because you thought she was helpless. You called her weak because you mistook her quiet for ignorance. But the truth is much simpler than that. She was decent. You were dishonest. She was trusting. You were greedy. And now, under oath, you are collapsing under the weight of your own lies. Victor snapped. It was my money, he shouted. I earned it. She stayed home sewing clothes and dreaming. She didn't build what I built. Why should she get half? The instant the words left his mouth, the entire courtroom understood what had happened. He had just admitted it. Openly,
under oath. The judge stared at him. "Did you just confess to intentionally concealing marital assets to prevent your wife from receiving her lawful share?" Victor turned toward his lawyer, as though the man might somehow undo sound itself. His lawyer lowered his head into his hands. Helen took one step back. "No further questions." She returned to Joy's side and sat down. Joy was crying now, but not with the same pain she had walked in carrying. These were tears of release, the kind that come when pressure finally breaks after being held inside for too long. Helen squeezed her hand. "It's done," she whispered. But it wasn't. Not yet. Because Victor still had more to lose. His lawyer stood.
He adjusted his jacket with the rigid movement of a man trying to separate himself from disaster before it splashed onto him permanently. "Your Lordship," he said, "I respectfully move to withdraw as counsel." Victor jerked toward him. "What?" The judge's expression darkened. "On what basis?" The lawyer chose his words carefully. "A serious ethical issue has arisen. I cannot knowingly continue in a matter compromised by perjury." Translation: "I will not drown with this man." Victor lurched to his feet. "You can't leave me. I paid you." The bailiff moved immediately when Victor grabbed at his lawyer's jacket. Within seconds, Victor was forced back into his seat, breathing hard, tie loose, dignity unraveling in public. "Sit down," the judge warned, "or you will be removed." The lawyer was ordered to remain until the hearing concluded. He obeyed, but he physically shifted his chair farther away from Victor. That small movement said everything. Helen rose again. "Your Lordship, I have one more witness." Victor whispered, "No." But Helen was already speaking. "I call Miss Blessing Okonkwo." The side door opened. A young woman entered in a navy dress and flat shoes, visibly shaken but determined enough to keep walking. Victor looked like he had seen a ghost. "Blessing," he said under his breath. "Don't do this." She didn't even look at him. She took the oath and sat. Helen's tone changed when she addressed her. Softer, gentler. The voice of someone who knew the witness didn't need intimidation because truth was already painful enough. "Please tell the court your relationship to Mr. Okafor." Blessing swallowed hard. "I was his girlfriend for 2 years. "Was?" "Yes. I ended it yesterday." "Why?" Blessing turned toward Victor. "Because sometimes heartbreak burns clean enough to turn fear into courage." "Because I found out I wasn't the only one," she said. "And because I saw the messages he sent about his wife." The room stirred again. "What kind of messages?" Helen asked. Blessing's hands trembled, but her voice steadied with every sentence. "He called her useless. He said she was too weak to fight back. He bragged that he was going to destroy her in court. He said he wanted to leave her with nothing, not because he had to, but because it would teach her a lesson. He said making her beg would be fun." Joy covered her mouth. Victor stared straight ahead now, like a man hearing his own obituary. Blessing went on. "He told his friends he had hired a lawyer who could crush her. He said she was too poor and too broken to survive what he was about to do." The judge's face became harder with each line. "And there was another woman too," Blessing said, voice cracking. "He lied to everyone, about everything." Helen nodded gently. "No further questions." Victor's lawyer didn't even attempt cross-examination. At this point, there was nothing left to salvage. No angle, no strategy, no clever phrasing. Just wreckage. And if you've made it this far, take a second to hit like and subscribe, because stories like this remind us of something important. The people who look the quietest are not always the weakest, and pride has a way of collapsing loudest when it finally falls. The judge removed his glasses and cleaned them slowly. When he spoke, his voice was low and dangerous. "In all my years on the bench," he said, "I have seen bitterness, greed, and cruelty. But what I have witnessed here today stands among the ugliest displays of arrogance and deception this court has had to endure." He looked directly at Victor. "You came into this courtroom believing you could manipulate the process, conceal assets, degrade your wife, and then use the law as a weapon against her. You committed perjury. You concealed property. You used marital funds to sustain extramarital relationships. You attempted to financially cripple the defendant to deny her access to counsel. And you did all of this while mocking her in open court." Victor looked down. The judge turned to Joy. "Mrs. Okafor, this court should have protected you sooner. For that, I am sorry." Joy nodded through tears. Then the judge picked up his pen. "I am issuing immediate temporary orders pending full forensic review. First, all accounts, investments, and properties linked to Victor Okafor, Summit Holdings, and any related holding structures are frozen effective immediately." Victor made a broken sound in the back of his throat. "Second, Mrs. Joy Okafor is granted exclusive occupancy of the marital residence. Mr. Okafor will vacate by this evening. He may remove clothing and personal toiletries only." Victor looked up in disbelief. "Third, a full transcript of these proceedings is to be forwarded to the appropriate financial crimes authorities for investigation into fraud, perjury, concealment, and any related offenses." Now the room was completely silent. Even the air seemed to be listening. "Fourth, given the plaintiff's misconduct, the plaintiff shall bear 100% of the defendant's legal fees and related costs." A small smile touched Helen's mouth. The judge raised the gavel. "This court is adjourned." When the gavel came down, Victor's old life ended with it. People started moving. Chairs scraped. Voices rose in stunned whispers. But Victor remained seated for a few seconds, frozen in the wreckage of his own confidence. He had entered the courthouse expecting triumph. He was leaving it facing criminal exposure, financial ruin, public humiliation, and the horrifying realization that the woman he had tried to starve into silence had found a voice much bigger than his. He finally stood and walked toward Joy. "Please," he said, and his voice sounded strange now, thin and cracked. "Joy, don't do this. Where am I supposed to go?" Joy looked at him. And what made the moment powerful was not anger. It was the absence of it. She did not look like a woman burning for revenge. She looked like a woman who had finally run out of room inside herself for his chaos. Before she could speak, Helen stepped between them. "My daughter does not speak to men under fraud investigation," she said. Victor stared at her, defeated. "Please." Helen gestured toward one of her junior associates. "If you have anything to say, you may communicate through counsel." Then she turned to Joy. "Come, we have lunch reservations, and I believe 25 years is long enough to postpone a proper conversation between mother and daughter." They walked away. Joy did not look back. Not once. Victor stood there watching the courtroom doors close behind them, and for the first time in a very long time, he understood what real loneliness felt like. But the story was not over. Not quite. Outside the courthouse, the afternoon heat rolled through the city in shimmering waves. Cars passed. Vendors called out. The world kept moving the way it always does, even when someone's life has just collapsed in broad daylight. A black Mercedes pulled up to the curb. The rear window lowered. An older man sat inside, elegant, stern, and controlled in the way wealthy men often are when they've spent a lifetime turning emotion into leverage. Joy stopped walking. Her hand rose to her mouth. "Dad?" Helen's entire body went still. The man opened the door and stepped out. Samuel. Joy had not seen him in years. Not really. Not as a father. Not as someone safe. Only as a man who had once believed business was more important than tenderness, and that a successful-looking husband was better than an emotionally honest one. He looked at Joy, then Helen. "I heard what happened in there," he said. Helen's tone cooled several degrees. "Then you know this is not the moment." Samuel reached into his jacket and withdrew a document. "I'm here because Victor owes me money." Joy blinked. "What?" "He borrowed 15 million naira from my investment firm," Samuel said. "The marital home was pledged as collateral. The loan is in default." For one horrible second, it felt like the earth shifted under Joy's feet. She had just won the right to stay in her home. Was her own father now about to take it? Helen snatched the document from his hand and scanned it with frightening speed. Then something changed in her expression. Not fear, not concern. Amusement. Dark amusement. "Oh, Samuel," she said softly. "You really should have performed better due diligence." He frowned. "My lawyers checked the deed." "Yes," Helen replied. "But did they check the ownership structure?" From her briefcase, she produced another folder. In 2019, the property was transferred into a family asset trust for tax planning purposes. Any use of trust property as collateral requires written consent from all beneficiaries. She turned a page and held it beside the loan agreement. "My daughter never signed this." Joy looked at the signature and felt a new wave of cold move through her. "He forged it." Samuel went pale. "If the signature is forged," Helen said, "your collateral is void. You have no legal claim to that property." Samuel stared at the papers in disbelief. "That means I'm out 15 million. "Yes," Helen said. "And if you attempt to enforce a void agreement against my daughter, I will bury your firm in litigation so thoroughly, your grandchildren will still be reading the filings." Samuel looked from Helen to Joy. For the first time, he looked less like a financier and more like an aging man standing in front of the emotional consequences of his own long neglect. "What do you want from me?" he asked quietly. Helen didn't hesitate. "Walk away from the house. Pursue Victor personally if you wish. And apologize to your daughter." That landed harder than any legal threat. Samuel turned to Joy. His pride did not disappear. Men like Samuel didn't become soft in a single afternoon. But something in him lowered. "Joy," he said, voice rough. "I should have spoken to you before doing any business with him. I should have been a better father. I'm sorry." 25 years earlier, that apology might have broken her, might have made her cry, might have sent her reaching for a version of love she had spent her life hoping would eventually appear. But now she stood beside her mother, stronger than she had been in decades, and all she felt was a quiet sadness for what had never existed. "It's okay," she said. "You can go now." Samuel nodded once and got back into the car. The Mercedes pulled away. Helen watched it disappear into traffic, then looked at Joy. "Well," she said, "now can we finally eat?" Joy laughed. A real laugh. Unexpected and free. Then, without overthinking it, she stepped forward and wrapped her arms around her mother. Helen stiffened for the briefest moment, as though affection was a language she had once known but not spoken in years. Then she hugged her daughter back, tightly. "I missed you, Mama," Joy whispered. Helen closed her eyes. "I missed you too." If this story is hitting you right in the chest, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. And tell me in the comments, at what exact moment did you realize Victor's whole world was about to fall apart? 3 months later, the gallery opening was standing room only. Waiters moved elegantly through the crowd with trays of sparkling drinks and carefully plated appetizers. Conversations floated through the warm evening air. Soft music filled the space. Every wall held color, movement, and healing. Joy's exhibition was called Rebirth, and nearly every painting had already sold. She stood in the center of the room in a deep blue and gold dress of her own design, radiant in a way that had nothing to do with clothing and everything to do with freedom. The fragile woman from the courtroom was gone. In her place stood an artist, a businesswoman, and a woman who had finally stopped apologizing for surviving. The centerpiece of the exhibition was a painting titled The Gavel. It showed a courtroom washed in shadow, a woman in white standing like judgment itself, breaking chains wrapped around another woman who was finally lifting her head. People stopped in front of it and stayed there. Some stared. Some cried. Some reached for their wallets. One collector said, "I don't care what it costs. My wife needs this in our home." Joy smiled. "Thank you." Across the room, Helen stood with a glass of white wine in one hand, watching her daughter with an expression nobody in the legal world would have recognized. It was pride, yes, but softer than that, more vulnerable, more human. Her phone buzzed. She checked the screen. A news alert. Victor Okafor had been sentenced following investigations into fraud, financial concealment, forged documents, and laundering-related offenses. The hidden assets had been seized. The digital holdings had been traced. The lies had become evidence. The evidence had become judgment. Helen read the headline, then locked the phone and slipped it away. She had no need to savor it. Victor's punishment was no longer the center of the story. Joy's future was. A junior associate from Helen's firm arrived at the gallery carrying a tablet. "There's one more thing," he said, smiling. He turned the screen toward Joy. The final settlement had cleared. Recovered funds. Property proceeds. Damages. Costs. Everything the court had awarded after full review. Joy stared at the figure. For a second, she couldn't breathe. It was more money than she had ever imagined having control over in her entire life. Enough to build a studio. Enough to expand her design work. Enough to create security. Enough to help women who had lived through what she had lived through. Tears filled her eyes. "It's really over," she whispered. Helen stepped beside her and rested a hand on her shoulder. "No," she said gently. "Over is the wrong word. Over sounds like an ending. This is a beginning." Joy looked around the gallery, at the paintings, at the people, at the life unfolding around her. She thought of the courtroom, of the gray dress, of the empty table, of the moment Victor laughed because he thought no one was coming. He had mistaken silence for surrender. He had mistaken kindness for weakness. He had mistaken patience for stupidity. And like so many cruel people before him, he had believed power meant the right to humiliate someone smaller. What he never understood was that some people stay quiet, not because they are powerless, but because they are saving their strength for the exact right moment. Victor had learned too late that still water can hide enormous depth, that a gentle woman can survive things that would break louder people, that a mother, once she sees her child cornered, can become something terrifying. Joy lifted her chin and smiled through tears. The gallery lights shone against the paintings behind her, bright and alive and unashamed. She was no longer the woman waiting to be rescued. She was the woman who had survived, stood up, spoken out, and built something beautiful from the wreckage. And maybe that was the deepest justice of all. Not that Victor lost, but that Joy lived. Really lived. She laughed as guests gathered around her again. Collectors asked questions. Friends embraced her. New opportunities opened in real time. And somewhere, far from the music and light of that room, Victor sat alone with nothing but memory and consequence. Joy, meanwhile, had work to do. Art to create. Women to help. Dreams to fund. A life to claim. The name she had carried all those years had finally become true. Joy. And if you stayed with me until the end of this story, let me know where you're watching from. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, and tell me this. If you were in that courtroom, what do you think was the exact moment Victor knew he had already lost?